welcome everyone to GeoHug. So before we kick off today's session, I'd just like to take this time to acknowledge the traditional lands which we're all coming from today. I live on the beautiful lands of the Gadigal of the people of the Aurora Nation. And I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past, present and future. And yes, I am so excited to have Indrani Mukherjee joining us today. So Indrani is a lecturer and researcher in earth sciences at the University of New South Wales. She's always been fascinated with the fact that the transition of a simple cell into a complex one billions of years ago is the reason that we share the planet with millions of species today. So her research questions key concepts and explores links between early evolution, the origin of complex life, and formation of precious mineral deposits. So with all of her experience, it is going to be amazing to get a summary of her research in deep time geology and also discussing recent trends in geoscience's lack of popularity. With her clever title, I Look at Rocks But Don't Have a Beard. So it is going to be a great session. I hope you all enjoy it. Please use the chat and we'll open up the floor for discussions at the end. And yes, thank you so much, Indrani, for joining. It's amazing having you.
Thanks so much, Jess. Really appreciate the opportunity. Thanks again, Jess, for this wonderful opportunity. I'm really excited about today's session. I know some of you are thinking about my title. I really thought about it, and it does sound very bizarre, but hopefully it'll come across in my presentation as to why I chose this title. But before I start my presentation, just wanted to say that I'm in the lands of the Bedigal people here, and as a migrant in Australia, I feel extremely privileged to be pursuing my scientific dreams in Australia, and I do pay my respects to all of Australia's First Nations, one of the oldest continuing cultures in the world. And with that, I will start with my first slide, which my husband reminded me yesterday how busy and confusing it looks. And I think that's on purpose. I want you to frown at this slide and go, well, what's she doing? Why is there's a lot, it's like a hodgepodge. But please do focus on this bit here. There was this recent article that said, you just look at rocks and have beards. That's the general conception about geology. And that's not right. I found it very, not offensive, but I got annoyed because I'm a geologist and I don't have a beard. And then I started to think, maybe we're not doing enough in the geoscience community to put the word out there that geology is a diverse field of science with diverse people working towards a geoscientific goal, whatever that goal may be. And so that's why I decided to choose this title, that I do look at rocks and I don't have a beard. And as mentioned earlier, John, I would like to let you know that I have absolutely nothing against bearded men. Nothing at all. Nothing against bearded men. What was that, Chris? Oh, no worries. You're welcome. Honestly, I know that for a fact that I've got nothing against bearded men because I took quite a while to find this picture of Chris Hemsworth. Scrolling, admiring, scrolling. Took me a bit of time to find this one. But no, seriously, it's not about having a go at bearded men or having a go at white men or having a go at men in general. This presentation is not about that. I'm just saying what the current perception is about geology and that we need to change it. We really need to change it because we know in the geoscience community that we are a diverse bunch of people. And that should be well reflected in people's perception about us. What does ChatGPT think about us? Look at this. It really annoyed me. Overall, while geology may not be as universally popular as some other subjects, it certainly has its own dedicated community of professionals and enthusiasts. And that's about right. We are very good at talking about our field of science amongst ourselves. But when it comes to letting the wider public know about what we do and how important it is, I think we fail there. I think we have failed. Really, we have. We have done our share, but I think we need to do more. That includes me as well. I speak on behalf of all of us. Because truly, what is geology all about? It's understanding 4.56 billion years of Earth's history, whichever field of geoscience you're in. We're trying to understand what the rocks are trying to tell us, or whatever history is being recorded in our rocks. And when we think, I think in our heads, we think that this is a spectacular image. We're talking about the history of our Earth. But I think when we talk about it to the wider public, that's what they're seeing. They don't see the beautiful picture of Cradle Mountain or that artist's impression of the Archean. They don't see any of that. What glares, because they're on their phones. Young people are on their phones. Everyone's on their phones these days. They come across articles and they see things like this. You look at just rocks and have beards. Being LGBT in geoscience is like being invisible. Shocking statistics about women in science in general. And if you look at women in geology, it's even worse. So we're not actually getting across what we do properly to the public. It's the same thing. I was recently at a Science Meets Parliament and I was talking to the minister regarding how geoscience is on the decline and universities are cutting geoscience subjects from courses. And it's a serious issue, but this is what the public sees it. This is an article from the ABC. And even though the article talks about how mining will be required to get to net zero, people are seeing this. They're seeing this pristine, beautiful looking beach and then a mine. And they think, oh God, this field of science is all about destruction, environmental destruction. They don't see the urgency that we have or we need in improving the future of geoscience. Look at this. This is incredible, right? Because we are drilling on Mars. In 10 years' time, we will have rocks being delivered to us from Mars to be looked. This is the level of excitement I can feel being a geologist. But do others see it in that way? No, because our field of science is marred with certain issues. And I think as long as we don't recognize that and address it, it will be very difficult for us as the geoscientific community to address these challenges of the future and get geoscience going, up and running, because we will need the next generation of geoscientists to tackle climate change and everything else. And I think that's because we think of Australia, right? Think of Australia, we've got 24 million people. And we have to convince these 24 million people and emphasize the importance of geoscience. This is one way of looking at Australia, but this is another way of looking at Australia. What are we catering to? What constitutes that 24 million people? Are we talking to these different groups? Are we tailoring our content to make sure that it reaches these different diverse communities? Because Australia is incredibly multicultural. Are we actually doing our bit, or do we have generic statements that we think, oh, we're doing a fantastic job. We had an amazing open day session. We did all sorts of things. Kids came, had fun, and then went away and forgotten all about geoscience altogether. We have to tailor what we're doing when we're trying to convey message. Here's an interesting slide. Mentioned before, being LGBT in geoscience is like being invisible. Yes, progress is being made, but at a glacial pace. People on ABC are reading these all the time. There was a recent survey released on gender disparity. Look at this, mining, 80% men. And if you think that, oh, well, at least you're catering to 50% of the population, which is men, I don't think that's true either, because the younger generation are very mindful of gender disparity as well. I have had students in term 1 just this year, where they've spoken of how they've taken up science because of their mother or their girlfriend or their whoever, and they take gender disparity very seriously. They don't want to be in sectors which has serious gender disparity issues. So you're not catering to anyone here if we don't take this seriously. This is the statistics. 47% of women in Australian workforce, only 16% in STEM skilled workforce. it's incredibly hard. And you're going to see a lot of statistics of women, because I'm a woman and I've, looked at this particular part. There are lots of other minorities and we all need to look at, but I don't have the data to show you for all other minorities, but we do have the data for women. And can I just very quickly specify, I'm talking about opportunity versus outcome here. There's a difference. I'm very mindful of the fact, for instance, in my case, that having a career in academia is tough. It's not just tough for women. It is very tough for men as well. But there are certain barriers that are only experienced by minorities. Those are not necessarily experienced by men. There's obviously some blanket, it's hard to get through in academia. But there are some instances where it's particularly hard for minorities. And I can speak for someone who's a woman and a person of color. It's not easy. So going back to my next slide, which is quite often I've had this comment from people that, oh, but surely it's worse in India. And yeah, it is. I agree. I'm happy to admit that things aren't as rosy as they should be. And have I had it better in Australia in some respects? Yes, absolutely. But this trend that we see about 43% Indian women students graduate and only 14, it's mimicked everywhere else in the world. It's not just an Indian thing. And if you go through this article, this summarizes beautifully about the plight of a female Indian geologist in India. In previously, multinational companies have taken up lands of indigenous people in India and have not rehabilitated them as promised. And now they've turned against the governments. And if they are, we call them Naxals, and the people have turned against the government. So when geologists go out for field work, it's incredibly hard because they are extremely dangerous locations to do field work in. There's issues with caste system. Sometimes geologists, when they go out and they want to rent a place, quite often they get asked what caste they belong to. And it's very, very undignifying and unacceptable. Sexism and safety for female geologists is such a massive issue in India. Now, which one of these 4 bullet points have I experienced in Australia in the field? None. But I will have you know that I almost gave up geology. I almost gave up geology in 2018. I almost gave up geology if it wasn't for Jackie. So there are challenges even in a developed nation like Australia. They're just of a different nature. And what challenges I faced, I think it's for a different day. I will probably need a whole day to talk about that. But I'm just saying that the challenges are different in a different nation. And if it wasn't for extremely strong mentorship that I had around me, and I would particularly like to mention Jackie, I don't think I would be pursuing geology. So no, it's not easy to have a career in geology at all. And guess what? Just been sent an email by Science and Technology Australia to discuss about my career pathways in STEM. Now, if I start discussing all these things, as part of the STA STEM advocate, I have to go and do school visits and all kinds of things. Do I actually tell them what it is to be a geologist? Because if I do, they're not going to want to take up geology, which then means that as a geoscientific community, we must be prepared to make changes, make the field of science inclusive, diverse, and actually be respectful to one another. So we set up a good reputation for our field of science. So when we're out doing public outreach, it means something. And so I think it's critically important that we improve the perception about geoscience. Now, how can we do that? I think I've whinged a lot. Might as well give you some solutions. One option is to ask Chris Hemsworth. Now, but I'm told he's very busy and he can't do everything that we ask him to do. But he does think geology is awesome, which is great. No, seriously, jokes apart. There is progress being made. Glacial pace, but there is progress being made. I think we need to talk about that as well. While we're talking about the problems, it's very good to address the problems. Let's also start talking about some of the progress that's being made. There's a recent article about women in mining, a snapshot in 2023. You never see that on ABC. You won't see that. How about my own positive experience with the mining industry? I've worked with several mining industry people. They've been ultra professional, respectful, friendly. They treat me as their colleague, and it's been a very positive experience. Perhaps I could talk about that as well as the problems that are being faced in the mining. So that's one way of going about it. The other one is, of course, I think this is something we talk about a lot anyway, about the, how important mining or geology or using earth resources is important for our everyday life. I think this gets to people quite easily. And we've done this quite a while now, for a while, but I think it's getting a bit old. I mean, of course, we can revamp the way. I mean, this is probably the most boring way you can talk to them about mining. I'm just saying that it's not a bad idea to reminding the society of all the things that they actually survive on. Here's another example for those who know Sabine Zahirovic, incredible geoscience communicator. He organized this community session in honor of the Turkish and Syrian community in Sydney. And he invited a couple of panelists, and they all talked about various things, very short, very targeted. This was for the community, like the wider public. And we all went from talking about really classic geology about earthquakes right up to engineering. And it was beautifully demonstrated the impact that classical geology has on our decision-making for engineering and infrastructure for earthquakes. I think that was a brilliant way of showcasing the actual impact of geology. And while some of the stuff that the hardcore geologists do will never get mentioned in the public, because I think what people see is the end product of our understandings of Earth. But how important it is to have those fundamental concepts in geology, that was really beautifully showcased as part of that community program. So perhaps we could do more of those things. Here's another one, the Bearded Lady Project, challenging the face of science. If you've had a look at those Earth, I think it's called Earth Future Festival or something like that, but it's a great film to watch. So we are, being creative about how we deal with geoscience outreach within our society, but also issues pertaining to geosciences within the geoscientific community. Here's another really good article, the geological period that no one wants to talk about, menstruation in the field. Again, I absolutely respect that it probably is cringeworthy for some, but guess what? If we talk about it long enough, it probably will be normalized. It's a biological phenomena. Women go through this. We're not asking for mercy or sympathy or anything. Just be aware of it. Just be aware of it. If you're taking female students in the field, just make sure that you understand and not make a big deal about it. It's nothing to make a big deal about it. It's a normal thing. It's like a headache or whatever, stomachache. Things happen. And we just have to be mindful of these things. So really, ultimately, we have to get it right. Now, I've used this example because I'm in the strenuous process of applying for a French visa. Those who have Australian citizenship and have never had to apply for a visa like an Indian citizen, such as myself, you probably won't get the joke, but hopefully some of the audience members are from, the non-visa people where we have to work and, go crazy with our paperwork in order to get a visa. And so I've used this example. You have to get the requirements right. It's like the passport photo that we need for our application submission. Look at me with a lobster, beautiful lobster, incredible amount of information. Here I am with a crocodile, a baby crocodile. How often does a visa application center gets a photo like that? No. But ultimately, it's this one that's required. The one on, I don't know why my pointer is not working, but it's the one on the far right that's going to be eligible. I think that's what we need to think about when we popularize geology in society. It's to do with getting it right. So we tailor our content for specific communities, because until we do that, we're not going to get what we actually need to get done. In my case, a French visa. And the picture on the far right, as my Australian friend Tom Sharp would tell me, I've basically lost all hope in that picture. And that summarizes that photo quite well. Anyway, so let's go through the bullet points real quick. Training the next generation of environmental guardians. We're teaching geology in our schools. Quite often you get to meet politicians, policymakers, you get to meet school teachers. Let's talk about geology to them. We need to talk about the role of geoscience in climate change as well. I don't think it's that well known. Quite often geology is considered rather anti-climate change, and that's a perception we really need to change. More diversity of people, more diversity in thoughts. And we have to understand diversity does not necessarily mean person of color or minority. It's diversity of thoughts. It's what your group is made of. We have to really think about this word very carefully. So it's, and understand the nuances of it as well. Public engagement at conferences. I don't think we do that in geology. If anything, we're not, we never have sessions that's free, open to the public. Just one day in the conference, one big picture talk, one keynote that everyone can attend. Do we do that? No, we don't. Ensuring and not just talking about diversity. It's been happening a lot. We have EDI committees and whatnot. If it really and truly worked, we wouldn't be seeing the problems that we're seeing today. It's not working. Whatever we're doing, it's not working. So we really need to think about it and not just talk about wanting diversity in our departments and organizations. And grab media opportunities. If you want to get a media opportunity, if you get one, just grab it and insist on advertising geology. Quite often they get the juicy bits out of you, early Earth, Mars, this and that, and they forget about it. Maybe ask them a 5-minute or 2-minute segment on how the popularity of geoscience is declining and that we need to do something about it. And we need to come together. Can I emphasize on the fact that we really need to work together? We have to think of ourselves as an Indian joint family. My goodness, you have no idea the differences of opinion that will occur or exist within an Indian joint family. It's ridiculous. But if they can do it, so can we. We need to figure out our own differences before we, go out and create a scene in public. We really need to work on that. And I think we can. So let's do that. Speaking of Goldschmidt, we are organizing this session. So if you're attending Goldschmidt, please think about attending this, because it's going to be a very good session. Even if I say so myself, yes, me and my colleagues are organizing this. It should be good fun. So please definitely join it. Now let's talk about what Jess actually asked me to talk about. And that's what I mean. We have to go through this initial bit of whatever you call it to get to the actual subject. That was my whole point, to take you through this crazy roller coaster of how we need geoscience in our schools and this and that to get here, because what we do is really important. And I've spoken of this topic so many times now that it gets quite boring. So, and it's called the boring billion too. So it's I don't know what to say about it, but honestly, I am surprised that I'm still talking about it, because I would have thought, because this work was done in 2018, started in 2014, and I thought the whole word would sort of die out, but it's not dying out. It's like long COVID. There's always this remnant cough still hanging around. That's what this term is doing. I have no idea why it still exists. Now I have serious issues with it. So let me tell you what this is all about. There's a time span in Earth's history that's known as the boring billion, and there's only one man you can blame for it. Late Professor Martin Brazier, just for fun, I think, he coined the term boring billion. Before that, in 1998. And I think before that, Roger Buick gets the credit for calling this time period one of the dullest in Earth's history. One of the dullest. A whole billion years of Earth's history was apparently very dull. Why? Why is it so dull? It's because I think most of the macroevolution took place after this, right? You see all the fancy dinosaur stuff, your cells, all the cool things that David Attenborough loves to talk about. All of those things you see after the boring billion. And so the conclusion is that obviously everything before that must have been ultra boring. And that's because we don't necessarily appreciate what we can't see. And I think we focus on the macro world so much that we sometimes forget about the micro world. I did click, but it didn't work. Oh, it is working. It's a bit slow, the internet. So yeah, the macro world gets a lot of attention. So there's some diversity and sort of disparity issues even in the macro and micro world, I tell you. Here's a list of things. You may choose to read it or not. That's fine. But all you need to know is that we really need the microbial diversity for the macro diversity to be sustained. You can't have macro diversity if you don't have microbial diversity. As simple as that. They are the foundation of the food chain, and they have played and will continue to play a very important role in evolution of life, like they have in the past, but they quite often get absolutely ignored. And that's why quite often the period is called boring billion, despite ample evidence that the period marks quite a remarkable period in Earth's history. So why boring? This is a classic picture. I'm sure people in my field will have used this 10 million times. Lines et al. 2014, Lines et al. 2021. I thought he would have changed his mind by now, but having met him last year, I don't think he has. So what's the problem? The problem is that according to this part of the theory, is that low and non-fluctuating conditions of oxygen in the atmosphere was the problem why we didn't see the macroevolution that you see. So in other words, oxygen is very important for life. When you see more oxygen, you see greater diversity in biological evolution. And when you see low oxygen, you see lower biological evolution. And the graph on the left here shows all the geochemical trends that are ultimately as a result of low oxygen in the atmosphere. I'm sorry, the internet is a bit slow, so my pointer looks like it's going crazy. So I probably won't try to use it as much. What this slide is essentially trying to tell you that they place a lot of emphasis, one part of the group places a lot of emphasis on oxygen concentration in the atmosphere. So in the boring billion bit, which is from 1800 to 800 million years, there was stable oxygen conditions, nothing much happened. And that's resulted in very low and sort of flat trends in, I don't know, all sorts of isotopes, molybdenum, uranium, chromium, and carbon isotopes. And that sort of represents some sort of geological stasis. And that geological stasis has resulted in evolutionary stasis as well. And so let's all decide and agree with late Professor Martin Brazier that the period was boring. But we love placing a lot of emphasis on oxygen, and I get it. I get it. It's important for us. It's important for you. It's important for bearded and non-bearded individuals. I get it. But if you look at primitive organisms, they didn't require as much oxygen as we need. Sometimes, and in fact, we know 50% of the world's oxygen today is being produced by organisms and phytoplanktons in the ocean. So some organisms don't necessarily need oxygen. So to place that level of, influence is wrong in my opinion. And so if oxygen is not important, well, what else is? So obviously we need lots of elements in life, and turns out that the trace elements are of critical importance for you, for me, for bacteria, for fungi, everybody. So what do trends of nutrient trace elements look like during the boring billion period? Now just focus on the rectangle, the red dashed rectangle, and you can see it's flat as oh, well, that must mean that nothing happened. So my research looked into, again, looking at the evolution of some of the trace elements during the boring billion to see if that is the same as what previous research was, or is it different? And conventionally, researchers have used bulk rock techniques, but we chose to use in situ techniques. So I looked at the chemistry of pyrite in black shales through time. He's just traversing through different scales. Oops. And so I'm looking at the nutrient trace element or trace element concentration of this shiny, beautiful golden mineral here called pyrite, and seeing if through time, so we can construct a trend to see if nutrient trace elements remained flat or did it actually fluctuate. And I did it, and I used this machine for a long time, and hope to still continue to use it. And here's my results. Straight, let's jump onto the results. On your y-axis, you see a combination of nutrient trace elements. On your x-axis, you see time. And it looks busy. I think I'm known for my busy slides now, I think. But really, focus on the boring billion period only. It's not flat. As simple as that. Things did change. It went really, really low, and then it recovered. And so we published this in scientific reports, got a bit of traction. There was a subsequent paper in Geology where we added more data and understood trace element patterns in the rocks and how that corresponds to trace element utilization patterns. It's not as straightforward as we want it to be. For instance, if a trace element is available, it must be important. Or if a trace element is deficient, it must be bad. It's not as straightforward as that at all. Organisms are very smart. Their whole trace element utilization patterns are, they can manipulate that depending on what the trace element variability is in our oceans. If someone uses molybdenum and there's lack of molybdenum, they will look for another element that has similar chemical properties to molybdenum. So for instance, tungsten. And so organisms have these different ways, and they have evolved to manipulate the trace element transaction between the seawater and their cell within the cell boundary, essentially to regulate the concentration of elements to and fro. Even if an element is highly abundant, doesn't mean it's highly required by the organism. It could actually may well be super toxic. And so the cell boundaries then have this way of regulating, so they don't uptake that particular element anymore. And once the concentrations go down, I think they go back. So this is extremely complex, and therefore looking at trace element broad first order trace elements through time and understanding it is not as easy as we thought. But essentially, I'll just go back to this slide, is that we noticed that there was a decline in trace element concentration at the start of the boring billion. And as we went further into the boring billion, the trace elements repository sort of improved a bit. And how does that compare with milestones in early evolution? Well, we had lots going on. And honestly, if you're fascinated by dinosaurs, I don't blame you. Please, by all means, be very fascinated. But you wouldn't have a dinosaur if it wasn't for these evolutionary achievements in the boring billion. You just wouldn't. And so let's acknowledge that and recognize that as well. So all these early breakthroughs in our evolution occurred in that period when there were low trace elements. And I think that's because there was some sort of evolutionary pressure for organisms to evolve and diversify in that low trace element period. We know endosymbiosis evolved around that time as well. And I think it makes perfect sense. Here's a very modern day example of endosymbiosis, which is sort of a mutual relationship between two organisms. Sometimes one hosts the other, one is photosynthetic, and the other just provides a safe boundary for the other organism. So they work together. This example is of predation. Again, amoeba predating on green algae. But regardless, it's endosymbiosis or predation that actually resulted in the evolution of the first complex cell. That had to be met. That condition had to be met before any evolutionary breakthroughs occurred in Earth's history. And that also occurred in that low trace element period. So my point is that the period that everyone keeps harping on about being boring actually is the very reason why you and I exist. So because there was, this is my theory, because there was a nutrient stress time, low nutrient, that created some sort of evolutionary pressure for organisms to either come to a mutual symbiotic relationship or predatory relationships. Because these organisms that merged to form the first complex cell are perfectly capable of living on their own. There was no need for them to either fight with each other or be friendly with each other. There was no need. They can survive independently. Why would they come in a predatory or endosymbiotic relationship? Is because they were subjected to some form of stress. And I think there could have been other forms of stress, but I think the lack of nutrients will have added to that stress significantly. So here's how my results compare with published results. One is of the opinion that it's flat. Well, it's not flat. It's definitely not flat. And things are changing. So next slide. Is it going to change? Yeah. So this is how things have changed from 2014. It's taking its time. We'll come back. Yep. 2014 to 2021. See how it was completely flat before? Now in 2021, at least there's some acknowledgement about, yep, there have been pulses of oxygen and things are changing and things are not as flat and stable as we think of it. So yeah, there's no such thing as the boring billion, if you ask me. Very quickly, while I've been working on the boring billion and finding exciting stuff, we're also looking at how we can use geochemistry in mineral exploration. So I have particularly worked on pyrite chemistry in exploration. We published a paper in 2017, which gained a bit of interest from industry, and then we got funded by several mining companies. Very grateful to them as they sustained me before my current job here at UNSW. And so essentially we're looking at lots and lots of pyrite geochemical data, and we trying to figure out how we can best use the data to help us find mineral deposits. In my case, I've worked on SEDEX zinc-lead deposits. I know it looks very busy. I think I've gained a reputation of extremely busy slides through this session, but let me just break it down for you. We're basically looking at all the data with one simple goal. Can we use the data for unknown samples to see if we can use it for vectoring purposes? And I can't reveal all information about this graph because we're still on the verge of publishing it. But essentially on your right here, you've got a map of the MacArthur Basin. The red triangle is where all the goodies, where all the money is, where all the mineral deposits are. And if you're looking at drill holes that are, you know, like almost 60 kilometers away from that mineralized zone, then that will have a certain signature. And it's being able to properly differentiate between what's background and what's mineralized using the geochemical data. That's all the end. We don't want to go into genesis. We don't want to go into any of these things. Once you've collected lots and lots of data, I think we just need to let the rocks do the speaking rather than our brains. And so we were successful in basically saying what's background and what's mineralized. And then once you've got that, what's background and what's mineralized, it's what happens between those two zones. And that's not always linear. The data can behave in certain ways that can signify or indicate that it is close to a mineral deposit, and it's about those nuances in understanding how the geochemical data can help us. And so we're putting together a special issue in economic geology. Please do watch out for that. We'll have results from our industry project, but there are some other excellent contributors to this special issue. So do watch out for that one. Went to Canada last year and did some work on critical mineral exploration, which is to do with comparing the hyper-enriched black shales in Canada and China. So they show some, rather amazing similarities and then some dissimilarities. But we have some theories on hyper-enriched black shales evolve. So if any one of you are interested in discussing that with me, I would be very happy to. And we've recently put together a proposal and submitted it and this new AEA grants that the Department of Education released on what's critical about coal. I know I've said the word coal. My goodness, I'm going to be banned from geology all over again. But no, the idea is to assess critical elements potential of existing coal mines. We don't know, and knowing it's how difficult grant applications are to be successful with. I have zero hope, but well, hopefully we'll have some funding. So if any of you are interested in working or collaborating in that respect, I just thought I'd put it out there, because I think I'm of the opinion that we have to involve and include the non-renewables energy sector in our fight for climate change. So this proposal is not about coal mining coal for coal, where we are looking at existing coal mines and their critical elements potential. So trying to prevent further environmental damage by looking at existing coal mines and seeing if the mine life can be continued beyond what it is, just to see if we can extract critical metals for the net zero transition. And this is my last slide, which is, I remember seeing posters of this during the Australian War, when your government was telling everyone to join the force and fight the war. Well, here's a call out to all the geologists in our community. I think we need to come together and make sure that we really think about how we want the wider public to perceive our field of science as. Because I'm sure geologists are doing all sorts of amazing things. It needs to be out there in the public so we can inspire the next generation of geoscientists, because we really need to. Thank you.